Kia ora. E nā rangatira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana ki te kaupapa o te rā. Ko Rich Easton, taku ingoa. Welcome, I'm Rich Easton from the Neurological Foundation. Thank you so much for coming along to join us today. Both myself and our team are here to talk to you a little bit about the work that we do at the Neurological Foundation, and in particular about the funding that we provide for neuroscience research. With me today I have Sarah Schomburger. Dr. Sarah Schomburger is our Head of Research. We have Teresa Liebenberg, who's our supporter relations person, just standing out by the door. So she manages the relationship with all the wonderful people that donate money to us in the upper part of the North Island. And we have Audrey McLean-Ow, who is our research assistant. So she and Sarah work really close with many of you that apply for us for funding along the way. So I'm going to start off by just talking a little bit about the Neurological Foundation, what we do, and then Sarah's going to spend about 25-30 minutes talking a lot more about the type of funding we have and hopefully how to be successful when you apply to us. So this year is a really exciting year for the Neurological Foundation. It's our 50th anniversary, and we've been spending a lot of time this year celebrating that with lots of different people, celebrating with the people that help provide the money, the donors from all around the country, celebrating with the researchers that we've helped to fund along the way, and celebrating with all of the other people that help make our ecosystem work, the researchers that help do our reviews of our grants, etc. Back in 1971, our founders identified that there was a real gap in New Zealand about funding neurological research. In particular, they were clinical practitioners who every day saw people coming in with diseases but no pathway to hope for the future and how maybe those conditions could be addressed. And so set up the Neurological Foundation, working really closely with Epilepsy New Zealand at the time for our two main purposes: to fund research into neurological diseases and to provide education and awareness about the importance of neurological research. And we've taken that a little bit step further. So part of that, we spend a lot of time at events with the public, bringing researchers out to talk about their research, what they're looking to hopefully achieve. But also some of our education is around growing the pool of talent, both neuroscience researchers and clinical researchers as well. We can't pay for everybody to do everything, but part of the funding that we provide helps grow the careers of neuroscientists in New Zealand. And really important, 1 in 5 Kiwis is impacted. There's over 700 different types of neurological conditions. And for us, all of the funding that we get comes from donations and bequests that we receive from wonderful supporters throughout New Zealand. None of our funding is government funding. I know that many of you will have applied to places like HRC, which is where the government money comes in. Everything that we provide comes from donations from Kiwis around the country. Over the last 50 years, we're really excited to have been able to put $51 million into research throughout New Zealand. And if you compare that to a couple of our sister organisations in the UK, it's their 50th anniversary for the neurological research body over there. They've done a dollars for pounds equivalent of what we've been able to achieve in New Zealand, 10 times the population. And similarly in Australia, the Brain Foundation there was their 50th anniversary last year, and they've put about $9 to $10 million of research into the Australian environment and to the research community. So quite a difference between what we've been able to achieve as well. 950 project grants, research grants, fellowships during that time. Over 500 different individuals have been able to benefit from the research that we've been funding. About $7.5 million of that's gone on Parkinson's research, about $5.5 million around stroke. Somewhere between dementia and Alzheimer's is about 4.5, and as you can see from the slide, a whole pile of other areas where we've funded research, and it keeps changing as we go forward as well. And started from some quite humble beginnings. So our very first grant rounds were just a few $1,000s. In 1980, we funded about $140,000. By 1990, it was $500,000. 2010, it was up to $2 million. And just last year, in our grant run last year, was over $4 million of research. Now, obviously, cost of everything has gone up during that time, but also from the generosity that we've had from New Zealanders, we've been able to enable more and more research over those years. We've also got some really important relationships that we built up during that 50 years. So the first of those, many of you will be quite familiar with, is the Neurological Foundation Human Brain Bank, and a relationship that started back in 93, 94, with the funding of the first ever minus 80 degree deep freezer. And that relationship has grown and grown ever since then, to the point that in 2018, we decided that maybe trying to fund it every year through a project grant was not the most efficient way of doing it. So we entered into a memorandum of agreement with Sir Richard Fall and Maurice Curtis and the university for blocks of 5-year funding. So we're funded for the Brain Bank through to 2023. Similarly, back in 2008, we're really excited to set up the Chair of Clinical Neurology. Professor Alan Barber is the chair that we've had sitting in that role ever since he joined. And really excitingly, Alan actually had an earlier relationship with us. One of the fellowships that we offer is the Chapman Fellowship, which is aimed at helping trainee neurologists to get an interest in research as well as clinical practice. And Alan was one of our first early recipients of a Chapman Fellowship. The knowledge that he went overseas was learning about clot retrieval for stroke patients, brought that knowledge back to New Zealand, implemented it in the Auckland Hospital, has worked really hard over the last 10 plus years to refine that, but not just reserved it for Auckland. He's actually then worked really closely with Wellington and with Christchurch to ensure that they've got centres of excellence, which basically means that people having stroke that need a clot removed from their brain have access almost across New Zealand with the helicopter coverage that we have, and the ability for potentially people to walk out having received that procedure 2 or 3 days later, sometimes with little or no effect from a stroke. And Sarah and I were just chatting to Alan last week, so definitely over the last couple of years, in Auckland alone, the number of clot retrievals that we've been doing is the same as the whole of London, or the same as the whole of Scotland. So what a wonderful capability for New Zealanders. We haven't forgotten the South Island. So back many, many years ago in 2010, the Neurological Foundation worked really closely with the University of Otago and the Otago District Health Board to set up a chair role. At the time it was called the Neurological Foundation Chair of Neurosurgery. And Professor Dirk de Ridder came over from Belgium to New Zealand to help set up that learning opportunity around neurosurgery, helping to train neurosurgeons, and at the same time work closely with the DHB down there. Just last year, we went through a review with the University of Otago because the fundraising that we carried out all got passed to the university, so it's set up as an endowed fund. So the chair role has been renamed to basically reflect the community that funded it, which is the Otago and Southland Chair of Neurosurgery. So our team, we have a very mixed team of people. Our governing board is called the Council, and it's made up of, at the moment, 9 people from around New Zealand, literally from Dunedin up to Auckland, mostly with business backgrounds, a couple of people with research and clinical backgrounds. And the first of those is our newly appointed chair just at the end of last year. So Professor Cathy Stanier, many of you may know Cathy. She does a lot of work as a clinical researcher between here and the DHB just over the road around stroke recovery, and obviously plays a big role with many of you in the university. We have a medical advisor, Dr. Neil Anderson. So Neil was our first ever recipient of our Chapman Fellowship, went overseas to a very prestigious university to learn a pile of things, has brought those back. He's now one of New Zealand's leading neurologists. He's also a wonderful source if you ever want to know the history of neurology, neurological research, in New Zealand, he has a whole wealth of information in that space as well. We have 2 committees that Sarah will talk to you a little bit more about, their scientific and our personal awards committees, made up of scientists and clinicians from around New Zealand that volunteer their time to help us being able to do the things that we do. We have offices literally just down the road on Grafton Road. If you ever walk past the little old cottages, do pop in and say hi. I'd love to see some of you. But we also have a team of people, in particular in the roles similar to Teresa's, that are based around New Zealand. So they're working really closely with their donors and also bringing the researchers out into the community to talk about the things that we do. Looking forward into the future, I've got a couple of things that we've been working on developing out. So the first of those is getting a lot clearer about how we make sure that in all of the grants that we fund, we've got a good understanding of outcomes for Maori, and we've got some work that we're doing, and we're collaborating with Auckland Medical Research Foundation about how we make sure that as we move forward, a fair and equitable approach is taken for all of the research that we fund. Starting to look a little bit at an idea that Kathy has been talking to us about around public patient interest groups and how we work together with people living with a condition to help build the strength of the relationship around the areas that people are researching. And we're beginning to explore a little bit. At the moment, most all of our funding is one-off funding for projects or annual funding for an individual fellowship or scholarship, but looking at setting up some more endowed fellowships so that, or chair roles, or something in that nature that will be there for perpetuity. So I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Sarah Schomburger, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about the wonderful world of research. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich, and hi everyone. It's so nice to be back at the university. For those who don't know me, I have a very long history here of more than 20 years, so really nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd, and I hope you find the information I've got for you really interesting and helpful as well. So I joined the foundation in 2019, and one of my first priorities was to bring our grants system online. So I want to say thank you to those who have provided feedback and ideas and everything, and also been very patient with us as we've navigated that process. So I'm just going to talk a bit about some stats I'm going to focus on the last 5 years, and I'm going to give some tips, which I'm sure you're all really keen on. You don't have to take mad notes. This is all going to be on our website. And then I'm just going to go through a bit about our grants and our reporting and that sort of thing. And we're hoping to leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. So as you can see from Rich's graph that he talked about, since 2010, the amount of funding we're giving out has actually doubled. But this is the number of grants that we've been giving out in the last 5 years. In the dark blue, you can see that the actual number of grants we're giving out has not really increased, but our applications have. So in the light blue, for 2020, we actually received 135 applications last year. So I think this kind of reflects the increasing cost of research. So as a foundation, we're really wanting to look at ways that we can hopefully increase the amount of funding that we're able to give out and keep up with the increasing cost of research. So I did a couple of pie graphs to give you an idea of who is getting our funding. So one of our key goals is to be a funder of early career researchers and make sure that we're really developing that capacity in New Zealand. So our research fellows in blue, combined with the students in green, show that more than half of our funding is actually going to those early on in their career. But when you look into it a bit more deeply, so we've got the academic staff in orange, and I just looked at it for our last grant round. I went in and had a look at all the grants to see who had research fellows on their grants, who had students or working expenses for PhDs, and it turns out that 76% of the grants we've just funded in our recent round have early career researchers on them. So that's really great for the foundation because we are a seed funder. We get things started, we get things going, we hopefully get careers going. So that's really exciting for us. One interesting thing that we find is that we have slightly more females that we fund instead of males. And this is really clear in our fellowships and scholarships. We get a lot more applicants from females, so I don't know why that is, but that's something interesting that we see. One thing that I thought you might be interested in also is the success rate for the different institutions. So you can see that most of our requests come from the University of Auckland and the University of Otago, and they have kind of similar success rates. One very interesting thing there, the University of Canterbury, in the last 5 years, they've only applied for 8 grants, but their success rate is pretty impressive. So yeah, that's just a bit of interesting data. So just an overview, we have 2 funding rounds a year. Large and small projects, our early career fellowships are mostly twice a year. We have conference and training course grants as well. And then doctoral scholarships, our senior fellowships and our summer studentships are once a year. So our travel grants are only available for those who already have project or fellowship or scholarship grants with us. And we have 2 committees, as Rich mentioned. So we have a scientific advisory committee that looks at our project grants and our conference and travel. And then we have a personal awards committee that interviews all of our fellowship and scholarship applicants. And then they make recommendations to our council, and that is then announced early July and early December. So this is what I've been working on the last couple of years, and managed to go online last year, yay. It's a similar portal to some of the other small funders. So hopefully those of you who have applied have managed to navigate it all right. So everything needs to be applied through our online portal. You need to have an account to put in an application, but if you just want to find out information, just click on that blue help button, and that has all the information on our grants on the help wiki. One common thing that I get is that people try to put their email address in and it says that it's already in there. So if someone's entered you as a co-applicant, then your details will already be in the system. So just contact us and we will change your account to an applicant account. And this is just what our help wiki looks like. So you can see we've got lots of different types of grants. We also administer grants for the Catwalk Trust. And I'm not going to go through all the details. You can see they're all there and you can have a look at them yourself. But I'm going to start with my top 5 tips. And the first one, which I know all the funders say, is read the guidelines. But it is really difficult if I get an application that I can tell someone's put a lot of time and effort into, and I have to go back and say to them, sorry, you're ineligible for this. So that's really difficult. So hopefully everything's clear. If it's not, just get in touch and ask me any questions that you have. So my second tip is to really consider the purpose of the foundation. So our purpose is to be a catalyst to improve the future quality of life for New Zealanders impacted by neurological conditions. So the way I sort of think about it is, if a supporter came up to you and said, why should I put my money into your project? What would you say to them? And I think, there's people here that I know have done some fantastic talks for us around the country, and I'm sure they get asked that question. So yeah, it's really important to consider that the money we get is donations, and we're really wanting to provide the biggest impact possible for those people. They usually have either conditions themselves or close family members have them. I know the third one may possibly fall on deaf ears because I do have a background in applying for grants and all that hard stuff, so allow lots of time to get feedback from colleagues if you can. So anyone who's named on the grant should really be reading the grant and providing feedback on it. For example, if you put a clinician on the grant, the committee will be able to tell if the clinician hasn't really had any input into the clinical part of your application. And those outside your field of research. So when we think there's more than 700 neurological conditions, there's no way our committee can have a vast knowledge of all of those, as well as the really complex methodology that I know a lot of you do. So if you give your application to someone in a different field and they can understand it, then hopefully that will mean our committee can understand it as well. Just a small one, when you submit your application, it goes to the research office. I think it's pretty good here at Auckland, but it will take time, so you need to allow time for it to go through the research office, and also they may not proofread it, they may not pick up mistakes, so make sure it's in its final form. Last top tip is to not rush resubmission. So we allow only one resubmission of any grant application. So often you'll get feedback because we are one of the funders that provides feedback, which is part of our building capacity. So you may get feedback such as a fellowship might say you really need to work on building your CV to be competitive. So that's going to take time, so allow time for that. Or it may say you need preliminary data. So also allow time for that. Don't just quickly put in the grant again, but really take note of the feedback and give yourself time to get it into top condition. So our main focus for our grant funding is scientific quality, which is all about being able to tell our supporters that their money is having the greatest impact in New Zealand. So I remember a family that came and talked to us, and they were thinking of maybe supporting a small project grant a year, but they made it clear they were talking to lots of different charities. They weren't committing to anything. They were just having a little conversation with us. But we were able to go through just the amazing high quality of science that we have in New Zealand and our processes to make sure that we're, taking the top of the top from that quality science. And just really talked them through our processes, that we've got really good processes for making sure that we're funding the best research. And by the end of that conversation, they were committing to supporting 2 grants a year. So I think it makes a real difference, just being able to demonstrate to our supporters that scientific quality. And I have to say, you guys make it really hard for our committees because the level of research in New Zealand is incredible. So your work has to be original and significant. There has to be a gap in the field that you're clearly identifying what your project is going to do to fill that gap or to be a part of that. So you need to just show you've got really good knowledge of the literature in that field. What is it saying? What previous work has been done by you or by others? So it's really important just to include that stuff. We don't want to be duplicating work in New Zealand. We're really keen on collaboration and making sure that we're continually advancing forward rather than duplicating anything. So one of the things that I sometimes see is that people put links or other things like that in their application. So the committee doesn't always have time to go and look at your links or even look at your previous publications. So whatever they need to know, try and make sure that it's actually written in the application. And if you think about yourself, if you put yourself in the shoes of a committee member, you've got a whole lot of applications to read, and how can they connect with your application? How can you make it really simple for them to understand and connect with and think, yes, this is great, and they've got everything there that I need? So for the research design, one of the words we kind of use for this is, because of, how competitive our grants are, the research design really needs to be watertight. So clear project timeline. It's good to be ambitious, but we want the committee to be confident you can actually complete what you've said you're going to do in the time that you've got. And include contingency plans. So if you've got overlapping objectives, a Gantt chart can be really helpful to show when you're doing the work and how you're going to fit it all into the timeline. And also one thing to be aware of is if you've got a critical first objective, the committee will be concerned that if that doesn't work out, the project will fall over. They call it a house of cards application. So if you need to do preliminary work to demonstrate that you can do that first objective, it might be better to start with a small project grant and do that first. Basically, the committee just needs to be convinced You've got the facilities, the expertise, the team around you to complete everything that you've said you're going to do in the time that you're going to do it. And don't try and fit it into a certain budget of what you think the foundation wants, or try and fit it into a small project grant budget. Look at what you need, what it costs, and apply for that. So even if it's like 30,000, rather than trying to fit it into a small project grant budget, just apply for a large project grant for $30,000. Also, we really recommend getting good statistical advice. So even if it's a small project grant, it might be just a feasibility or pilot study. If the data is actually not going to be meaningful, then it won't be funded. So you need to be able to demonstrate whatever size group that you're using is actually going to be statistically meaningful. You may want to put a statistician on your grant, or if you don't, if you want to show that you've got that statistical advice, then just get a letter of support just to show us that you know that what you're going to do is going to be statistically meaningful. So as I said before, we're really keen on collaboration, consultation. If your project is going to eventually end up in the clinic, even if you're still at the lab bench stage, talk to a clinician, get some consultation from them. We don't want to get all the way to that stage and have them say, oh, actually, there's just no way the District Health Board would implement this. It's not cost effective. It's just not going to happen. You want to know that right at the beginning. So we just really encourage people to get clinicians on their projects where relevant. You don't have to name them. You can just have a letter of support to say that you've talked to them and discussed your idea with them and how relevant it will be. You know, it may be 20 years down the track, but that's okay. So any collaborators, even if you're using their facilities. So a lot of applications say, you know, we've talked to this person or we're working with this person, but there's actually no evidence that they've agreed to that. So it's really good to have that letter of support just to show that they've agreed to be involved in your project. Another thing that we get at the moment is qualitative research. They're really looking for it to be done professionally so that the outcomes are meaningful. And you need someone who's really experienced in this area to do that, and we need to make sure that whatever the outcomes are going to be, that the patients have that support around them to be able to deal with those outcomes. So you may know that that's going to happen. If you're in a clinical setting, you may know, yep, we've got all those support services, but if it's not written in the application, then the committee doesn't know that. Also, it's been really great to see Maori and Pacifica participants being put on more grants and being included in applications, but what we want is that they're there in high enough numbers so the data is meaningful for their cohort. And for Maori, this can also be regional as well as urban, so different cohorts. So just think about those and just how you're making sure you've got the right numbers of different groups of participants. You know, a difficult one can be engaging with cultural groups or patient groups. And as Rich said, as a foundation, we're looking for ways to facilitate this because we really want people to start with the patients and sort of think, what do they need? What's going to end up being implemented? Even if I'm starting at the lab bench, you know, what's going to be meaningful? So if we can facilitate that in any way, we're really keen on that. So if you know of groups of people that are interested in being in focus groups or anything like that, just let us know. And one way to engage with people is just volunteering with them. So that's something quite significant with our fellowships, which I'll talk about a bit later. I just want to briefly say how the projects and small projects are reviewed. So they're reviewed together. So the difference is that small projects are only looked at by the committee, whereas large projects go to international reviewers as well. But when they come back, we start clean at the committee with a discussion, and then they all get scored in the committee and ranked according to score. So if you think you can sort of maybe just submit a small project application and it's not that difficult and, you know, doesn't need to be so watertight, it won't actually get anywhere. So yeah, make sure that you put the same amount of effort into a small project as you do into a large project, even though you don't have to write as much text. Usually everything's just ranked and then it's cut off according to our budget. And I've got a little bit of data just to show that that works out pretty even. So you can see across the different years, the number of small projects and projects have been quite similar. I've also put the average amount of our project grants there. We don't have a cap on our large project grants. So we have awarded before over $300,000 for a project grant. We also get project grants that may be like $50,000. So as I said before, don't sort of think about what's the foundation looking for, think about what you really need and what's achievable in the time frame. But one interesting thing that you can see is that last year, the success rates, even though they're quite even across small projects and projects, are actually a lot lower. And that's reflecting the larger number of applications that we're receiving. One of the areas where extra funding is going is into our fellowships. So you can see over the last 5 years, we've actually increased the number of fellowships that we've been giving out, but also those fellowships are increasing in amount because that's, people's salaries, they go up over time. So since 2016, we've almost doubled the amount of money that we're giving out for fellowships, and that's because we've started offering our early career ones twice a year. So that's been really exciting to be able to do that. We used to just have our Philip Wrightson Fellowship, so that's named after one of our founders. But it was quite difficult to compare, people straight out of a PhD with more senior people and people that were doing postdocs in New Zealand or overseas. So we've separated them out now. So we've got our first fellowship and our senior research fellowship, and then the Philip Wrightson is just for overseas. Then we've got the 3 clinical ones also. So VJ Chapman, which is named after one of our founders, is for neurology trainees wanting to do some research overseas. We've got the O'Brien Estate, which has put together a clinical fellowship for non-medical health professionals, so that might be physiotherapists or nurse specialists, and to undertake research as well. And then we've also got our senior clinical research fellowship, so that's trying to provide a way for clinicians to establish themselves as academics as well. So we're always looking at ways that we can meet the need in New Zealand and sort of make sure we're building capacity across both clinical and university-based research. We're usually able to offer 2 or 3 PhD scholarships a year. So we have the W and B Miller Estate, and also our current supporters, Peter and Wendy Gillespie, who fund scholarships each year. And we've also just been given a new estate, which is our Dawn Fellowship, and this is from a family that had Charcot-Marie tooth disease. So our idea here was that if we made sort of different priorities and we made that priority 1 for this fellowship, that maybe we would stimulate research into this rare disorder, which is, as you know, it's not easy to get funding to research rare disorders. So we've been very excited to fund that to Dr. Whitney Whitford this year. So it's the inaugural fellowship, and she's going to be looking at the genetics of Charcot-Marie tooth. So we never know when these things are going to happen with the foundation, but it's really exciting to be able to offer that new fellowship. So as I said before, scientific qualities are always really important. We're looking for projects that are really going to be able to achieve what they say they're going to achieve. But for fellowships and scholarships, we're really looking at the person as well. So we're looking for someone that has neurologically focused career goals, engagement with patient communities. As I mentioned before, we want to see, that people are really interested in getting out there and volunteering and being a part of what's going on, and it just really influences the research in a really positive way. So people that are going to be really good ambassadors for the foundation is what we're looking for, and I know there's people here that have done talks for us and been really engaged with our supporters, and that's really fantastic because that translates into further support for the foundation financially. So really important and really exciting to see. And obviously we're looking at academic record, we're looking for number of publications, but also the quality of those publications. And then we want to know that people are really well supported in a good lab. So the quality of your application can really show the level of support that you're getting by your supervisor or mentor, and also their letter of support. So these are different things we look at to make sure that people are really well supported. We unfortunately can't interview everybody anymore. We're getting too many applications. But for those who do get an interview, I give out some interview tips. Basically, I suggest you practice, especially if you're, just a young, nervous researcher, as we see with some of our PhD scholarship applicants. So just make sure Zoom's all working, get them to practice with you actually over Zoom. And what we used to do is we used to get people to come up and have their interviews in person, which is so much nicer. But really not a good idea these days to be flying people up from Dunedin for a 20-minute interview. So we're doing them all just over Zoom now, just to keep it consistent and a bit more environmentally friendly. So think of the interview though as a discussion. Like if you were there in person, you wouldn't have visual aids, you wouldn't be screen sharing, you're just there so we can get to know you, hear about your projects, kind of see your passion for the area, and that's what you need to focus on in your interviews. So we also offer summer studentships. So just make sure you've got your supervisor organised, or if you're the supervisor, make sure you got your student organised and liaise with your university before applying. We also offer grants that conference conveners can apply for. So I'm sure many of you are going to AWCBR in September, and some of you may be supported by our funding. We've always funded them. I mentioned travel grants before. They're associated with all of our large projects, scholarships and fellowships, but you just need to apply for them separately so that we can make sure that you're going to present something associated with the work that we've funded you to do. And then we also have specific grants for conference and training for neurosurgeons, which is based on the Hackett Memorial Trust. So I'd like you to meet our committee co-chairs, Associate Professor Bronwyn Kibble from Victoria and Professor John Dalrymple-Alford from the University of Canterbury. So they lead our scientific advisory committee that do projects, small projects and conference and training course grants. So Bronwyn has some fantastic experience in the area of MS pain research, and she's just got a spin-off company that she's working on at the moment for a new treatment for MS, which is really exciting. If any of you have ever met John, he's just the most knowledgeable in any neurodegenerative disorder and he's really fantastic to have as well. So we're very grateful that these people volunteer their time for us to lead our committees. And if you've ever had an interview, you would have probably seen Louise or Scott, and Scott is based here at the University of Auckland. So they interview scholarship and fellowship applicants, and our studentships are just sort of reviewed offline because we get the answer back to them within a month. So yeah, just really grateful to have these amazing people co-chairing our committees. And what we do is we have a pool of committee members and we just draw from them each round into each of the different committees based on what the needs are. So we try to be really transparent with our process and make sure that we don't have people that are named on grants actually reviewing any grants in that category. So neuroscience in New Zealand is very small, so that's really important to us, just to try and make sure it's all fair and that the committee is from, across the country, different career stages, and we always have, at least one neurologist as well as our medical advisor on our committees. So we just have a number of conflicts that we make sure also people with those conflicts are not discussing or voting on applications, and it's basically any association or perceived association with any of the applicants. If you want to know what committees are looking for, join one. So you're always welcome to send me your information if you're interested in being a part of our committee, and you can see the link there. It's on our website as well. So just briefly, once you've been successful at getting an application, everything lives online within your application. So you have all these tabs, but the ones that you're most likely to use, you may use the variation tab if you're submitting a contract variation, but the report tab. So you can submit progress reports. They're due annually on the start date of your grant, and then after the end of your grant, you'll submit a final report. And there's also a panel in there that mentions if we've got a specific donor supporting your grant, and if you thank them in your report, then we can send a copy of your report to them as well. So that's something that's really exciting for our supporters, to just be able to read the progress of the grants as they're going. So I know you all hear a lot about research impact, and one of the things that we have talked about is just that we want to be able to demonstrate that to our supporters who are funding the work. So there's all the standard ones, which are conferences and publications, and I guess the big aim of finally having something in clinical practice, but there's a lot of other aspects of impact as well. So I've mentioned about building capacity in neuroscience. Maybe you've got somebody on your grant that you're training or developing. Maybe your grant has helped you to get a larger HRC project or program grant. Maybe it's helped you to get a permanent position at the university. All these things are really important to us, and we love to know about them. Also, a lot of the stuff that you're doing may just be understanding the nervous system or understanding neurological conditions or developing the technology to do this. And those are all really important of capacity building in neuroscience in New Zealand. And then also, where does your project sit? It may be at the start of the process, it may be basic lab science, but you can sort of think about where it's going, where it's leading to, and collaborations you might develop along the way, especially as we talked about with patient groups or cultural groups. And that's all really important aspects of impact that we want to share with our supporters. So yeah, really grateful to all of you who have been submitting reports through our new online system as well. And you know, it takes a while to get these things up and running and working correctly, but yeah, it's all going really well. And just want to say thank you to everyone and just open it up for questions.